and thanks, Minister, for coming into the House. And I'm very glad that we've been given sufficient time to speak at second stage on this bill. And I do think that whether some of us are here for only one term or many terms over future decades in the Dáil or Seanad, I think this bill will probably be the most important bill that we will have experience dealing with. And I suppose it's important to acknowledge, obviously, that this is a hugely important moment for campaigners. I know yourself, Minister, in terms of your many years of campaigning on this issue, in terms of getting our country into a place where we're tackling the climate crisis in this country, and of course making our contribution to the global task that is needed. I'm conscious there's been a lot of things that have been said, and so I want to confine my comments to a small number of areas in the bill. I think it's important to say that obviously there's an enormous leap in terms of climate action policy in this bill, in terms of the ambitious target to reduce emissions by 51% by 2030 and to be carbon neutral by 2050. But I do think we need to look at the tools by which this government is planning to drive down emissions. And ultimately, Ministers, you know only too well we can have all the lofty ambitions in the world, but it's actually how we do it. And in that context, it's the time frame for action, and it's the penalties or the correction mechanisms that are in place if government fails to act. And I suppose I look at this, and when I look at the two together, I believe there's a paucity of ambition in this bill with regards to climate, with regards to tackling climate change. And the perspective I come from at this from is when I look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was put in place in 2012, which was put in place to set down specific targets and actions that any government would have to take with regards to ensuring the management, the sound management of the public finance in this country. And I contrast that with the fiscal framework that is within this bill. And within the Fiscal Responsibility Act, we had a very clear commitment to annual targeting of debt and deficit targets, a medium-term objective that was reviewed every 3 years, and an explicit correction mechanism. Now, I compared that with this bill, and we don't have specific annual targets. We have these, obviously, the 2-year, 5-year plans and a target for 9 years' time. But I think, you know, there is a very real and considerable concern that we are backloading the need for action and drastic action to the end of this decade. And I appreciate you have said, Minister, that you believe that it's been front-loaded, but I do believe, and I share the concerns of others, that it is being backloaded. And secondly, with regards to the absence of, I suppose, what I might call a correction mechanism, and I do take on board that there is a carry forward of, I suppose, provisions from one year to the next, depending on the performance. But, you know, if we look at the limiting of the liability, which I think is a welcome feature in the bill, in terms of curbing the ability of any corporate body to be able to take a case against the state in the event of their loss of earnings or business. I do think that that limiting of liability does need to be carefully calibrated. None of us want a situation where the government is taken to court because of failure to meet its targets, but we do need to put in place some sort of a stick, and perhaps it needs to be some sort of automatic stabiliser whereby failure to meet a target and something will kick in, but we have to be crystal clear that it's those who are best able to pay should pay. And I'm reminded of the definition put forward by the Mary Robinson Foundation with regards to climate justice, that those who cause the most damage must shoulder the greatest responsibility. And I think we could be mindful of that with regards to how we approach that correction mechanism. I suppose I also want to say that, look, you know, at the heart of this bill, you know, I very much believe there's a recognition about the importance and necessity of the role of the state to intervene in the climate crisis, that there's a recognition here that relying on the market has not worked and will not work into the future. But there's two vital pieces missing. And firstly, it's with regards to that, I suppose, paltry reference to a just transition. And I know many others have spoken about this issue, but we need to strengthen those provisions. And I want to pay particular tribute to the trade union movement, who led on talking about the need for a just transition, about communities, workers and industry coming together. And I particularly welcome the appointment of Patricia King to the Advisory Council. But I do think there's an opportunity in this bill to get it right, not kick it down the road to another piece of legislation, as I know has been committed. I think the second thing is the commitment to climate justice. And I do think words like shall, insofar as practical, safeguard the rights of vulnerable persons. To me, that's the equivalent of motherhood and apple pie. We all want world peace. We all want climate action. But unless we're willing to prioritise climate justice, then we're not going to, I think, achieve the targets that we need to achieve. And in the few seconds I have left, Minister, I just want to say, with regards to climate justice, I think, this bill could do an awful lot more to recognise that we have to change how we deliver housing in this country and how we deliver public transport. We have a situation where 14.8% of all the housing stock in this country is F or G energy rated, and we know that Ireland, so it's no surprise that Ireland has the second highest rate of utility bill arrears amongst the low-income households, and that's because of how our households are constructed and the failure to I suppose, the failure to put in place proper state provision of housing. The last point I just want to make, Seanad, is that we need a new way of thinking about public transport. And I know, Minister, this is a matter very close to your own heart, but I need to express my outrage here about the manner in which the Dart South West project is progressing. We have a situation where the Cabra community is going to be bypassed by this magnificent piece of infrastructure. This is a community that has thousands of people commuting day in, day out. We cannot have communities like Cabra, or indeed anywhere else, bypassed, and I would ask that you urgently address that, and I don't believe you can stand over it, or I should hope that you don't stand over it, but I would ask, in your capacity as Minister, that you address that as urgently as possible.
Thank you, Senator.